of the issues, only 2 of the 8 got actually completed. That's not too surprising if we have things that will take longer. Like epics is a great example where we actually have a couple long-running epics. Mary is going to talk about one of those in just a second. But I would appreciate if everybody puts in milestones or due dates associated with them so we can have an idea from that aspect. And Marin, I will stall until he turns into an attendee. Similarly, Epics is kind of in that spot. Both of those were expected to be more longer range, 2-month efforts, so it's not too surprising that they're in the current status they are. And then we have one MR, which it's good to see that it's still got a lot of activity going on it, but it hasn't merged yet. So we'll see how that pans out. So a little bit low on our retrospective goals of trying to get things completed, but appreciate everybody working towards the ones that have gotten done. From there, Marin, are you actually available?
Yes, thanks, Christopher. I just wanted to give a couple of updates. We did a lot of work with of the issues that are required for the single code base efforts. You can see some stats there on what is assigned, what is still opened, and what doesn't have a milestone yet, or rather graphs, if nothing else. And we also have a graph that, thanks to Lucas, you can all track and see, where we are seeing a pretty nice drop, a pretty nice trend of drop in the diff between C and EE. I see that Lucas wrote some things up, so if Lucas is here, maybe you want to speak up?
Yes, the graph is logarithmic scale, so it doesn't look like much progress, but since January 1st, we already shaved off like 45% of the diff. And we are now at a level like in 2015 when it comes to changed files. So we're making a big progress. Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Lucas, for the graph. It is really exciting to see this. I also want to say that May 22nd, which is the deadline for this effort, is very ambitious. But I think all of us should try and be ambitious, and I think Felipe is going to speak up a bit about some of the efforts she had with front end.
Hey, so I'm very happy to share that all the differences between verify and release have all been addressed, so there aren't any more differences in CSS, JavaScript, Vue, or YAML for these 2 teams. I've also addressed all the rest of the CSS differences apart from the main application file, which is something I'm still working on. And I'm very happy to help with any front-end issue. So if you need any help, please reach out in the working group for the single code base Slack channel. We have closed 77 issues so far between Phil and I, but we still have 94 open issues for front end. Virginia, you're unmuted. Rachel, you have the next point to the agenda.
I think Christopher is going to lead the rest.
Yes, thanks, Marin and Philippa. Thank you for that update around the code merge. Just want to emphasize that this is an important aspect of this. So for all engineering managers, if you can work with your product managers to make sure that this is getting some focus and priority, we really appreciate it. If you're seeing challenges in an area, I really encourage you to escalate that issue with either your director or myself and Marin as well, just so we understand the challenges associated with it. As Marin said, May 22nd is a very ambitious date, and as we know, ambition is great, but realism is also very important as well. And because of that, we just want to have an appropriate view of it. The other thing is if it needs to be that we push more so that we see progress, this is an area where we have to have a little bit of give and take with product management to make sure we balance this, because both Marin and myself agree that this is going to make us more effective moving forward, and I want to make sure that we get this in as efficiently but also as quickly as possible, because if it makes us more effective, then that's a key aspect to our development. Moving on to what went well. So just want to highlight a few things, and there's obviously a lot in the document. Really appreciate everybody putting information in. To highlight one big area that I saw was dog fooding. Great to see that we're using GitLab.com. Rachel, if you could share that experience with more team members, appreciate it, because I think that's a key aspect to us getting more effective, is to actually use our own product. in ways that we didn't really expect we were going to use it 2 years ago, as an example. Next area I want to cover on is the redefining of Q1 OKRs for the UX team. Christy says that they've gotten some momentum there. That's great to hear, because that's important to us delivering on that. Just FYI for most folks, we're in a fiscal year model now, so OKRs run from February through April. So we've got one more month left in the month, or one more month left in the quarter, rather, to handle that. Another area that I want to highlight is around release and deployment. Essentially, there are a couple teams that basically have worked on defining their process around releases, which has made things go smoother, and also done required updates. I think that specifically was the delivery and the security teams both did that, where they were able to better define things. And because of those definitions, we were actually able to see much more effective releasing happen associated with that. And then the last area that I want to highlight is the review process that went well. Specifically, the reviewer roulette for the monitor team seems to be helping them spread the load across both reviewers and maintainers, so that they have a more efficient way of handling it. So what were the challenges that we had in the past month? So the counter to that, where reviewer roulette's working, is that a couple of issues got stuck in maintainer review, and 3 issues getting stuck in security review at the cutoff. One aspect to call out here is Kathy Wang has gone in and changed, or maybe reiterated, is probably a better way to put it, that security reviews are not required for commit. There are other methods that they actually catch issues associated with that. So if you have a review that's being held up because of a security review and you're at the deadline, please view that as a nice to have, not a requirement for code commit associated with it. Similarly, a Verify team also had a similar issue with a lengthy back and forth in the review process that we'll have to look at addressing. It seems some teams have now started to see some issues related to the flakiness of various parts of the QA validation. It sounds like we might need to evaluate that. I don't know if we have any metric information around that, but that would be probably good information for us to basically understand a little bit better what's going on related to issues in our verification part of our process. And then the last area that I wanted to highlight was communication. It sounds like giving early visibility to the state of deliverables that potentially are not going to get addressed in the release turned into a little bit of a challenge for a couple teams. Secure and Verify are the 2 teams, I believe, that specifically call it out, where some missed milestones were probably not as effectively communicated around that. And again, our philosophy is velocity over predictability. So we're not expecting that these things all get in, but making sure that you communicate effectively when things are being missed would be a valuable aspect to us improving our process. Based on that, those were the highlights I wanted to call on what went well and what went wrong. I want to then hand it over to teams to talk about areas we can potentially improve, and gives folks time to do that so that we can have some discussion around it if necessary. So Rachel, if you're available, we'll start with you on monthly retrospectives, and then move to other folks in the queue. I'm looking to see Rachel's not online, so that's fine. Essentially, she's looking to use Sean's method of automating monthly retrospectives. I actually think I might do the same thing for the global retrospective to include that. So that's a good piece of information. The next one is on a lot of test data for the environments, being required to test various things related to geo. Mac, are you on the phone?
Yes, I am.
I guess the question would be is I know you're working on building environments. Is that something that potentially this is an area would help with, or is it, you think it's something that we should be talking about from that perspective?
So we have been looking into how we can see data in staging and the test performance, the performance test instance. The GDK is also on our radar. We also don't have anybody as a stable counterpart to Geo right now. So we're relying on developers from Geo to help us out here. And if we have a dedicated counterpart, we can take it on and start adding seed data, because we know where to add. It's just a matter of resource here.
Okay, so it's in the plan, but it's just farther down in the plan from a a staffing perspective. Got it. Okay. All right. So that's good to hear from the handling of that situation. Okay. Philippe with Plan, are you on?
I'll take it for him.
Okay, Sean. Sorry, I missed that.
Yeah, no, it's fine. So we had a couple of issues where they're actually slightly different, but they're both related to testing queries at scale. So one of them was about, we tested it, or the database team tested it on a production replica, which was great. And then we found some issues. So we had to go back and redo it, which is fine. I think that's sort of the process working as it should, even though it did take longer. The second one, we actually did do that, or the database team did do that, and it worked on staging and it worked on the production replica, but it didn't work on the production database, which I haven't checked in detail on this issue, but as I remember it, it was because, first of all, of the load on the production database, but also because of the gaps we were seeing in the data. So we're trying to update, say, 10,000 rows with this particular bad data to fix it at a time, but those 10,000 rows are very widely dispersed across the table, and that in this case causes a performance issue. So don't really know what the conclusion here is, to be honest, but I think in general the database team are doing a great job helping us test this stuff out, and hopefully Heinrich's situation where we did that and it still didn't work is a rare case. So maybe this should have gone in a different section, but yeah, I think it is an issue we sort of keep bumping into over time, where we write some code, typically a migration that runs against the database. It works fine on staging, it gets approved, but then when it hits production, we have issues that we didn't expect. And I guess the way that works is the new issues are never the same as the old issues, because otherwise we'd expect them. So the conclusion is databases are a land of contrasts, I guess. I don't really have anything beyond that.
Cool. Thanks, Sean. Maybe we talk about it offline. Like, this is a classic example of how can we make the staging potentially look more like production, or when do we get representative of production closer? Though, to your point, it's a constant challenge from that perspective. Cool. Winnie, are you on or available? Or anybody from Plan who wants to cover this?
I can try and jump in here. So I actually have not a huge amount of context for this one, because I think I forgot part of the issue. So I'm just trying to read it now. But I think for the issue where we added the reply to an individual comment, which is a new feature in 11.9, that was in 11.8 behind a feature flag, but we needed to do some stuff. And then, so, in theory, that should be no problem. It's going to be easily in 11.9. And in the end, we ended up rushing towards the end of 11.9. And we felt like we didn't have a great handle on what we were doing there. The documentation is good, but I think Dower's got some issues there as well, with the different places we have to look at this, and where's the source of truth. So I'll pass over to Dower.
Thanks. Yeah, we had some issues, some miscommunication around feature flags as well. We had a couple of features where we were using them, and then it turned out at some point that the expectations from the engineering side and the product side on when these would actually be, on the one hand, enabled by default in production or not, and what that was dependent on was a little bit unclear. I can go into more details in an issue at some point, but anyway, we're having trouble there. And part of the problem also had to do with whether these feature flags should enter the code base being enabled by default or disabled by default, and whether the intention is to basically have them be live on production automatically until we see it's broken and then disable it, or whether the rollout should be a little bit more controlled by having someone explicitly enable it, then determine if it works or not, disable it again if it doesn't, and if everything works as expected, then go in and remove the feature flag entirely, or change the default to be on by default before the actual release takes place, as opposed to having it be on by default. But then if something critical error comes up, one, it will hit us on production right away unless we thought to disable the feature flag ahead of the deploy. And if it then turns out this issue is critical, we need to make sure that we actually flip the default to false again before the release takes place, if we don't want customers to be hit with that critical issue once they install the package, if we, for whatever reason, hadn't had time to flip the feature flag. Anyway, all of these options have different pros and cons, but it's not quite clear from the documentation right now what the recommended approach is. And it's not quite clear between product and engineering either, whether we should be a little bit conservative by default with these, by having them off by default and only enabling them if we're super, super confident, or whether we want to be, again, kind of going for the highest possible velocity and potentially breaking things, which means that once we deploy, everything will be on by default. And then we just start disabling things as we run into issues. It's not quite clear what the expectation is.
So I remember I recently updated the process MD with feature flags to try and clear it up a bit. So there are like 3 bullet points in there, like guidelines on when and how to have this enabled or disabled. But would you be willing to maybe like work with me to specify like in more details? Because I wrote these 3 bullets and I kind of have an idea. So I'd be like very much happy to hear if we can specify this a bit better.
Absolutely. I hadn't seen the 3 bullets yet. It had been a little bit since I saw the process MD document, but that definitely seems to help. But yeah, let's talk. And I think we should also bring James Ramsey in the conversation because he has some product perspective on what
Perfect.
appear to be the priorities there and how they want to use feature flags.
Perfect.
Hey, Dawei, since you have most of the information, can you open an issue on this and get the link put into the retro? And if you want to assign it to me because you feel like I'm going to be the ultimate owner of this, or Marin,
Yeah,
if I can somehow wrangle him into helping me with this. It feels like the fact that we have 3 separate documents alone is problematic. So minimally, we should close that gap. And then to your point,
I'll go ahead and do that tomorrow. I've already spent some 45 minutes today talking about feature flags and related issues with other people, so it's very much top of mind. I'll get some thoughts down into an issue.
Okay, thank you. I appreciate it. Cool. DJ, are you available for daily metrics update, or not update, but things to improve?
Yeah. So essentially, we often run into, well, not often, but every couple of releases, we run into a case in the distribution team where the package size has jumped by a substantial amount, and at that point, we tend to try to figure out whether that's a legitimate jump in size because we're adding lots of great stuff, or if it's some sort of error, like maybe we've renamed a folder and that folder should be excluded and is no longer because it's not getting caught, or are we compiling assets differently and we have too many dev assets left in the build, or what's going on. At the moment, how we find that is usually based on during an RC or during a release that the package size exceeds what our package cloud instance will allow to upload, and then it just fails. The upload fails and the RC is blocked basically, and we're stuck there. So the improvement we're hoping to make is to get a better handle on these sizes and kind of know them on a daily basis, so we don't have this kind of rush to figure out whether the increase in size is legitimate or if it's some problem in the package at a time where we're blocking a release or an RC. So I have an open issue for that.
Cool. That sounds like a great improvement. Is it the case that your team would still detect this and then raise it with other teams, or because like file size sounds like a case of the offender may be farther back in the pipeline than a distribution, or is that not the case?
Yeah. So typically the offender. I wouldn't say typically. It depends on what's been added in the release, but often, yeah, it's further back in the Rails code base. Often in the gems having been changed, or duplicate gems, for example, coming into play, where we have 2 different versions of the same gem in play. At the moment with this issue, we would just be automating the tracking of it in the Omnibus CI, basically, and the process would remain the same. The team would be reaching out to other teams to figure out what had gone wrong.
And I think that's the right incremental step here is let's first get the data and kind of evaluate it and then figure out how far up the stream do we have to push it so that people are aware of this is that they potentially change the code base, which potentially breaks pieces like this. So thanks for that. That's great work. Cool. Seth or Clement, want to talk on the organizing discussions better?
Yeah, I can talk about this. So just one thing that we noticed that we felt we could improve on is just the organization of our communication within some of our larger issues. Essentially, we have these really big issues where there's a lot of people from the front end team, back end team, UX, PM, all contributing, and as they grow, some of us were having trouble going back and finding the places where the right conversations, I guess, to contribute to. And I will say that one thing that is helping that already is being able to turn any comment into a threaded discussion. And beyond that, we want to just make sure that we want to try to organize these discussions better and try to start discussions for a given topic and have a threaded discussion within there. And yeah, Christopher, so you're asking whether we should have a handbook adjustment or have this documented. We don't anywhere. I think it's a great idea. I think it's worth finding the right place to add some guidelines for this.
Okay, so Seth, can you take the action to open either MR against the handbook or an issue and to start the discussion, and then we can kind of work from there?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, cool. Thanks. Thomas, though Philippe is going to cover, I believe, this one.
Yes, Thomas is not there, so we cover for him. We basically have two main issues in Secure right now. They're related to communication, and it's related to what Seth was explaining as well. The first one is around the planning. We have a lot of issues tracking the progression of the deliverables, and it turns out that when the feature phrase is coming, it's really hard for us to figure out what is really done, what is the remaining amount of work, and we don't know where to start, what we can start communicating on or just testing. So we need to get better on that. We have an issue that is ongoing, and it has been ongoing since last month, since I'm stepping back from the EM role and Thomas is stepping in. So we are in the middle of the transition, so that's why we're taking time for this. And the second part of this issue is the documentation about our architecture. We've seen that some members in the team, especially the newcomers, have difficulties to figure out the whole picture. We have so many domains to cover, so many different architectures, so many features to cover, and they are using different languages, different technologies. It's, again, really hard to get the whole picture. So we need to get better and document better the whole architecture that we're using. Thank you. Back to you, Christopher.
Thanks. Darby and John have a note here about moving to a single code base. Is there any additional color either of you gentlemen would like to add?
No, thank you, Christopher. That pretty much sums it up. Just wanted to note that a few of the engineers on the front end and back end noticed that there's a lengthy iteration process when MRs touch CE and EE, and we're going to keep an eye on improvements, but we're thinking that the single code base migration should help improve this. Thanks.
Is there any way to correlate those MRs?
We haven't really thought about that so far, but we'll think about that and see if we can come up with a takeaway to help with that.
Okay. Yeah. The reason I ask is I'm doing a little bit of investigation into MR from creation to merge times, and we're seeing them grow. And if it's related to the CEE, that's a great causality to push on this sure. As well from that perspective.
Sure.
Okay.
I'll review that. Thanks, Chris.
Cool. All right. And then end-to-end testability, Mech.
Sure. So if you the previous point I added in the doc. So we have almost 2 weeks of consecutive greens now for QA staging and QA nightlies. And going forward, any new test failures will be dealt with the highest priority, and we will start to involve all the featured and cross-stage teams to address the failure. This is also documented in our guidelines. Back to you, Christopher.
Cool. All right. Thanks, Mac. All right. So we're into the improvements for next release and beyond. As you saw last time around, I came back through and looked at the issues and basically marked them with the retro. So at a high level, since we got a couple minutes, I'm going to try to at least pick and choose here, just ones that I think probably should be marked. And then if we need to debate it later on, we can certainly do that. So things I'm thinking about are, let's see here. The feature flags one obviously is one that we'll want to get covered and see if we can run that to ground in the next release or the release after. DJ, I'll track yours as well on the daily metrics, though it sounds like you've got that pretty well in hand. And then the handbook adjustment for organizing discussions better. Looks like a good one as well. And then Philippe, for the security team, I'll go ahead and you have two of those in there. I'll just go ahead and track those in there to make sure that we run those to ground as well. Which will be Thomas, really. And I think that's it. John, do you think it's worth opening an issue on the correlation, or do you want to take that outside of an issue for now?
We could go ahead and open an issue, Christopher, just to stay on top of it. Thank you.
Okay. So, okay. I'm assuming I should have been more explicit. You'll open the issue?
Yes, I will.
Okay,
yes,
thanks.
thank you.
Okay, great. Okay, cool. And I think that's the main ones I saw. Any others that we should call out? Any other topics we need to talk as far as a retro? Airing of grievances or